Hello everyone, welcome back to Professor's Play, the show where you can get just a pixel of deep thinking with your mostly nonsensical video game discussions. This is our first Professor's Play episode where we have covered a new game, so we're going to talk about that for a second, but before I wanted to tell you who we are. I am Professor Phil Chavot, he's Professor John Adams, and he's Professor Brendan West, and together we are professors who play video games. John, how are you?
Doing well. This is the first episode that we're shifting away from Pokemon. So those of you that thought they were a Pokemon podcast, you're wrong. But we still would love to have you here.
Professors Play Pokemon podcast. Alliterations are
too much peanuts.
So good.
We had to
It might be a bit. It might be a bit much. Yeah.
Brandon, how are you?
I am surviving.
That is
Here, I'm ready to talk about Hades.
You know, surviving is the first step to thriving.
That's true.
So
that is
you know,
true.
you
yeah.
gotta. You,
Except for today.
I
Today
don't
we're
know
going to
how
talk
it
about how
is.
dying a lot over
You're
and
right.
over and over again.
Actually,
is
wow.
the step to
What a good
thriving.
segue. You know?
in the game. Disclaimer.
True. We do not condone dying in real life.
No.
But in games, sure.
All the time.
So as avid fans of this show, you guys out there, I'm sure you're aware that
All
we
three of us.
always start a new game with a lore episode, even though we've never done that this far.
Yep.
But we're going to do that from now on.
Today's the day.
Whoops. So in any case, we're going to be playing and discussing the game Hades for the next few weeks. That is Hades. So what we're going to do here first is we're going to talk about like what is Hades, like the video game, not hell. Maybe a little bit
A little bit of that too.
What is Hades, a video game? Why we're playing it? Why we chose it to play, basically. How Hades came to be, and also then we're going to get into some Greek mythology because, surprise, surprise, a game called Hades leans heavily into that kind of stuff. But a fun fact: this is John's favorite game, top 3.
Man, yeah, easily top 3, maybe number 1.
Maybe number 1.
I love this game. So much
John
fun.
loves this game. It's also we're playing this game because it's good, but also because John wouldn't shut up about it.
Oh man, so good, guys. So good.
So here we are. But just some quick background info before we start. So it is developed by Supergiant Games, which, despite their name, is not a supergiant or a regular giant, or even a super company.
Nope.
But they do a really good job. They've had some really good games besides Hades, but Hades is kind of what put them on the map, so to speak. And it's we're gonna have some contention about this, but it's a roguelite RPG in which players take on the role of Zagreus, also known as Hot Daddy Z, apparently.
So
he
attractive.
is a good-looking man. You can see the drawing of him behind me. That is a drawing done by one of my students. So hopefully we'll see him build out more. And it is a hack and slash game in which you try to kill hordes of enemies and escape hell. Right? Is that it?
Yeah, one of the other unique things about it is that it's an isometric view. So those of you that don't know isometric, it's sort of halfway between a 2D from above and a 2D from the side. You have a 2D from an angle, and you stay at that isometric view throughout the length of the game.
Yes, so you don't control the camera, and it's like 2D, 3D, because the characters are 3D, but the camera is... It sounds awkward, but it's not.
It's not.
If it's done
very
well, it's
clean.
not.
It's very fluid.
Yeah. So what I just described, RPG, roguelike, hack and slash, all that stuff. Lots of stuff to unpack, which is kind of funny because that's what I'm going with. That's what I'm unpacking with my students in my video game class right now. We're talking about like defining genres in games and how it's hard to define genres in games because they have both style and looted components of like you can have a horror RPG, so you have to define what a game is in terms of mechanics and also style, right?
Yeah. What do you mean ludic components? Define that.
So ludic components are ludic is the part of games that are things you do in games. They're the mechanics, right? They're things the actual part of the game you play, and then you have the narrative components, which are the story happening either in the background or in the forefront. So in Pokemon, the ludic components are choosing which attacks you want to use, walking around.
We discussed it was a numbers and statistics game.
Yes,
You're
so
just rolling numbers against other people rolling numbers.
which would be kind of boring, but then they put the story in there, right? So it works. So yeah, you have to define games in kind of both ways, right? So some of the words we have here, RPG. Brandon, why don't you tell us what an RPG is?
It's a role-playing game.
Okay, that's the same answer my students gave me, and then I asked them for more. What does that mean?
You're not
for a video game.
You're not allowed to ask me for more.
What is... Fair enough. I'm not your real dad. What does that mean for a video game usually, for it to be an RPG?
This is where I'll probably show my ignorance because I know like RPG role-playing game. Typically, it's one in which you spec out your character. You oftentimes will have some sort of a class that you're going to go into. So basically, you get to choose, or at least have some control over your character's abilities, possibly also their personality and actions.
Yep.
In this case,
Perfect.
pretty much abilities.
RPGs are games you play a role. You're playing the role of the main character, but in video games, it technically usually means that you're also speccing out your character, either upgrading it with like different skills or with new armor and making it a better character.
And while I would say the looted components of this game, if I'm using that word correctly, are very RPG-esque.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really light RPG as far as story, because you're playing as a pre-made character in a pre-made settings on a pre-made sort of track where certain things have to happen. It's not like it's compared to like The Witcher 3 or Fallout, where you're making a completely new character that nobody's ever heard of and competing in choices that shape the entire destiny of the world.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like there's levels to this thing, right? It's also why it's hard to define.
Right.
It's like this one, the skill tree is not that it's more limited as in it's worse, but like it's different than playing Elden Ring, where you can probably create Zagreus in that game because you can do everything in that game. But those are different types of audiences it's going for, different types of games.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
it's
go
also
ahead.
different in the sense that it's not like Divinity or something where you're choosing like a class. You know, like at least from my experience so far, it's really more of like a kind of a mix and match system with your skills.
Yeah. You're choosing skill sets, but you're not actually choosing like a character personality traits or any of these like class structures where you'd say, now this time I will only play the game. Although I will argue that the weapons are kind of a class choice, and you may not have gotten there.
A little bit. Well, I've got the bow.
Okay, so you've unlocked different weapons.
Yeah, I picked my weapon.
Yeah, but in any case, it's like you're speccing out your character in a way that is not default.
Right.
And that's basically what
Yes.
RPG means,
Yeah.
right? And then we have hack and slash. John, do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, so hack and slash, your really common hack and slashes will be like the old Ninja Gaiden series, right? Your God of Wars are a classic hack and slash. These
Especially
are games,
the early ones.
especially the early ones, or the one that is most representative of this. If you've never played a game like Hades before, this really represents like or relates to like old school Diablo, where the idea is you're going to have a lot of enemies coming at you all at once, and your goal is to defeat like 40 at once, right? This is not a dueling game like Pokemon where you have one Pokemon versus another, or even like a slow fighter game where you have characters. This is you versus hordes, and
Yes.
those hordes are going to constantly be coming through. They're a little limited in Hades by the rooms that they've put in. So you move to one room, there's a horde. You beat that room. You move to the next room, there's a horde. You beat that horde. But the goal is to hack and slash, hence the title, your way through all of the enemy hordes.
Yep. And it's like, you know, a lot of enemies on screen. It's a combo-based gameplay, so you can button mash, but it's about timing combos at the right time so you can beat enemies more efficiently, right? Because different enemies have different weaknesses, so to speak.
Right.
But so if you ever played anything in the Muso series, which is the ones like Destiny Warriors, that kind of stuff, where it's you versus hundreds of enemies at once.
Yep.
Because the enemies are all much weaker than you usually, but they also are 100 of them. So you're like crowd control, hacking and slash your way through them, like you said.
Exactly. Now, when we talk about spectrums and scales, we talk about like combo games. This is not quite so combo-y as like your Ninja Gaidens, where you have, or like your Bayonettas, where you'd have like AABBYX squared to do a special move.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. Game is really closer to like your Dark Souls, where you've got a couple of key moves, and it's more about timing and dodging at the right times.
Cool.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, awesome. So, and then it's also okay, so we have some discussion here, but the official Hades description on Steam calls it a roguelike. It is technically a roguelite, and the difference there, it's literally one letter. So roguelike, like a rogue, and roguelite, like Diet Coke.
A light version.
A light version of a rogue.
Miller Lite.
Right?
Sponsor
And
us.
Doesn't Wikipedia also call it godlike? Or am I
um,
misremembering that?
I think it talks about. It starts with roguelike, and then I went to the Steam website to make sure they were using like and not light.
Right.
I think there's a godlike something in there, but I'm not sure exactly what that means, honestly. Because like I tell my class, like genres in video games are like asymmetrical, roguelike, RPG, horror with fantasy elements, that whatever. Too many.
Just like
right?
movies.
Too complicated.
But these terms do mean something, and they come from places. So, pixel of depth, Phil. What does rogue-like mean?
So rogue-like means like rogue, and not like a rogue as in like not the vampire. Well, kind of, but not like the character from X-Men,
Right.
Who like sucks people's life force. Rogue is a video game from 1980 in which they kind of started this mechanic of everything's procedurally generated, which means no level is ever the same, right? The video game, every time you walk into a new level, the video game is new.
Makes up the room. Based on sort of past interactions and or a random number generator.
Absolutely. So you're never seeing the same thing again twice. Like the odds of it happening are astronomical. And then whenever you die, you go back to the start, right? And in Rogue, the original one, you died, you lost everything. Progress, weapons, whatever, potions, whatever you acquired, experience points, you lost everything. So whenever we're talking about a game being a rogue, it means that it follows that exact same mechanic. And there's actually, I believe, there was a conference about this, because the term roguelike and roguelite and like a rogue were being used so loosely that in 2008 there was a video game conference in Berlin.
We nailed this down.
And they came up with the Berlin interpretation for what a roguelike is.
Okay.
So a game that mimics the original Rogue from 1980, which is literally a black screen with @ symbols moving around. It's very hard to understand what's happening. I'm assuming if you play it might be easier, but looking at it's hard. But imagine like when your Windows reboots. That's what it looks like. Yeah. Games were hard to play.
I was thinking,
and you would like pick up / characters, and that would be like a mystical sword.
Yeah.
And so when you died, the whole game would restart. Probably because they just didn't have the memory to save the game.
Yeah.
Right?
I was thinking like 1980. Man, what was video game technology like in 1980 flat?
Atari 2600, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's
well before the first Nintendo console was 5 years out. Yeah.
So we're back there.
We're back there, yeah. But so the eight things you have to have if you're a roguelike, okay? You have to have random map generation.
Okay.
So the procedural generation thing, right?
Got that.
Permadeath, which means you start again.
Right.
Turn-based combat.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
So there's a game on mobile called Pixel Dungeon, if you ever play it, and it is meant to emulate basically the exact game of that old Rogue. And it is, so
turn-based.
You move, they move,
Yes.
you move, they move.
It's not turn-based as in like Pokemon where it takes a while, but it's like you click a button to move, you do stuff.
You move 3 spaces, the dungeon reacts, and the monsters move 3 spaces.
Hades does not fit that.
No.
Correct. Grid-based movement, which is like, it doesn't necessarily mean like Fire Emblem style where you're literally moving on the grid. It just means that your player is occupying a spot in the grid at once and no one else can occupy that space.
D-pad movements, up, down, left, right.
So it could be like you're moving freely, but you're still moving on the grid per the programming.
Yeah.
Hades might fit that kind of.
It kind of does.
It kind of does, because the isometric nature of it.
Yeah.
The complexity to allow for multiple solutions, so you can find a sword or not, but you can still get through that level.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Hades, it would be crazy hard, but you could beat it on your first run.
You could.
There's a world in which that's possible.
So non-modal, so that all actions can be performed at any time. So again, you can choose, you can do attacks at any time. You can not do that. Resource management, and hack and slash.
Yep.
Nice.
So Hades does some of these things, but Hades calls itself a roguelike when it's actually a roguelite, which is a light version of rogue in the sense that it has some of these elements, and mainly it means it has the permadeath element. And the random map generation, so those two are like key for any type of rogue insert adjective here.
Right.
But it doesn't have the thing where if you die, you lose everything. Because what happens in Hades when you die?
So when you die in Hades, you start back again in Hades at the bottom of the underworld, but you maintain an experience currency. So there's darkness, and you collect darkness, and the darkness lets you buy like more health points or more upgrades for your character. And I will say that this quintessential ability of a roguelite, which is these games where you die and you lose almost everything. You lose your abilities, your weapons, your progress, but you don't lose the ability to grow, I think makes almost the perfect game. Roguelites are my favorite games.
I agree. I don't think of playing a roguelike or like just a rogue game now wouldn't be as fun, because if someone asked me what's the difference between a rogue game or like a hardcore roguelike and a game in which you die, every time you die it just takes you to the top screen and you have to restart, there's no difference.
No difference. And I will also say that like what it does is it forces you into a position where the game is based purely on skill and luck. So
Yes.
luck that the map generates stuff you need that time, and skill like you just got to be good enough.
You get better every time.
Where roguelite is a little gentler on everybody, right? Roguelite is like, okay, so good players might be able to make this through this in like 10 runs. Bad players will take 45, 50, 100 runs, but you're still going to make progress, and
Yes.
it feels better from a game
Oh,
perspective.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
It's a way better mechanic because in the original Rogue, it's like you start right. And this is not like a dig at the original Rogue. This was revolutionary at the time for
Yeah, it's
several
amazing.
reasons, but mostly because of procedure generated. The replayability of Rogue is infinite,
Right.
pretty much, right? So now, if you play a Rogue game and you die and you restart, the only thing that has gotten better, which would allow you to go further, is you. In roguelites, all the work you did before isn't all lost. Like, you lose almost everything. But you can still upgrade your character.
Right.
Which means that the next time you start at at level 1, you are going to get through it faster. You should, because you are a better character.
And
also
still,
you're better.
And it still maintains
Yes.
the skill thing, which is the cool part about rogues. I don't want that to be the only mechanic, but I do like that, like, my growth as an individual makes me better at the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then also, your character is also better, which is a kind of a reward for playing the game a bunch of times, right?
Right.
Which I think works way better. What do you think, Brandon?
No, I definitely prefer that, and already I can kind of my sort of fear with Hades is that I'm going to get like pretty far into it, into like, what is it? There are 4 layers.
4 layers.
Yeah, like if I get up into the 4th layer to like the final boss or something, and then have to start all the way back at the bottom, that I foresee is the situation in which I might be like,
That'll happen.
yeah, forget this, doing something else, right? And so the fact that I keep my experience, my bow and whatnot, that makes me less inclined to just like rage quit.
Yeah, and absolutely, because that means that the next time you get to the final boss, let's say you get to the final boss and you're, I don't know, level 25, whatever, however they define levels, right? So you're level 25, you die. Next time you get to the boss, you're going to be like 29. So you're going to have a better chance of beating, not only because you know what's happening, because you're better as a person who plays the game, but also your character is 4 levels stronger.
Right.
So it's a reward system for you playing the game as well as a way of keeping you coming back.
Right. It also just, to me, that just feels more, and I know this is going to sound like a very counterintuitive claim, it feels more realistic. All right, now, obviously the counter argument to that is, but you literally die and then come back to life, like, repeatedly, which...
Wait, that's not real?
Yeah, not that I've
You don't know.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly I don't.
Again, we
right?
only condone deaths in video games.
Yeah.
Professor's Play does not
But
support life-threatening situations.
Right, but it does mean that your character is like literally growing from experience, right? So it feels more like a journey,
Yeah.
right?
I
It
like
feels
that.
like I feel like that really builds the narrative arc because you can see where your characters come, and it sort of bakes failure into the game design, where the game's just like, of course you didn't make it out of Hades on your first try.
Yeah.
If you did, anyone could have done it. Right?
Fair enough. Yeah, so this is a good example of like the ludic helping the narrative aspects of it, right? So like, it makes sense that you wouldn't make it out of Hades in the first try because it's hard to do that if you know anything about Greek mythology or anything about any mythology. Like, getting out of hell is hard. You ever watch Constantine?
Yes.
The way to get into hell is looking into a cat's eyes in a bathtub. That's difficult. I would never do that. That sounds scary, right?
I mean, that sounds real scary, especially if your cat's afraid of water like mine is.
Yeah.
You ever try to hold on to a cat when it doesn't want to be held?
Yes.
It's like trying to hold on to a circular saw.
So the original Rogue in 1980 actually got a remake in 1984 where it's not just @ symbols on screen, it's like actual little character. It looks pretty much the same, but it looks cleaner. And I kind of want to try playing it just to see what it's like. But it was revolutionary because of the procedure generator thing. As I said, it means you can replay it forever, right? There's no end in sight, so it's like challenging, but also like fair because you're just trying to get further and further in. And also, at the time, as we're thinking about what video games look like, we have Pong, we have Pac-Man, we have Space Invaders and stuff like Galaga. So we have stuff that is based on high score. This is essentially a game that your high score is how deep you got.
Is the story.
Yes.
The story is the high score.
So the deeper you get in Rogue, so you can be like, I got to dungeon level 25, which is whatever, high, right? Or I guess low, because
Low.
you're going down.
Yep.
But still, it's like a way of playing to the strengths of games at the time that was building high scores. So it really took off, and then a lot of games tried to copy it, and it became its own genre. Kind of like how first-person shooters, until they became huge, were called Doom clones.
Yep.
Everything that was a first-person shooter was not called a first-person shooter because that wasn't a term. It was like Call of Duty is a Doom clone because the first game to ever do it was Doom, or do it well enough was Doom, right? So even James Bond for the N64 GoldenEye was what kind of began this trend of like, okay, this is so good that we can't call it a Doom clone.
It's too cool to be
Yes.
comparing to Doom.
So it became first-person shooter, right? And this is kind of where we're going with roguelites and roguelites. Eventually, it's just a way of saying you die and come back with some sort of
Except for Rogue's
keeping stats.
interesting because Rogue, the term is being lost to history a little bit because,
Yeah.
like as we were saying today, like you're having to explain a lot of this stuff to us, which we didn't know, right? So it's going a different direction than Doom, where people are saying, "Oh, well, that's cooler than Rogue, so we shouldn't call it." We've just lost that Rogue actually meant an original game, and it's becoming the term for the game itself.
I think true, but I think there's two differences there. One, you know what Doom is because of our age.
And Doom is still around,
Doom is still around. So when I say something is a Doom clone, you understand what it means.
right?
Roguelike, it just means what it means instead of meaning the game, because a lot of people that were around playing games now weren't playing games in 1980.
Right.
So we don't know that Rogue was a game. A lot of people know that Doom was a game.
Fair.
So
Fair.
that's kind of where, but I agree with you. Where like if Doom hadn't been remade and we said this is a Doom clone, they'd be like, cool. Doom clones or Doom likes are things that are first person shooters.
But do you ever
right?
think there will be a Rogue game that's so popular that we'll have to stop calling it roguelike?
I don't think so, because of the way that Rogue, like you said, we lost the meaning of what Rogue is because we didn't. The meaning of the game Rogue was never in the zeitgeist enough
That's what I'm saying.
that we associated it with the game instead of with just a term.
Right.
Right.
So it's going a different direction.
It's going a different direction. Like
But-
etymology is going a different direction there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if Hades didn't do it, then what will?
I mean, Hades is really good, guys.
Well, that's why like it's really good. It seems to, at least from what I saw, like universally praised, popular with critics, popular with players. Like
It won 3 different Game of the Year awards.
right. So if any game was going to be the one that like took over, you know, and it's not roguelike, it's Hades like.
Yep.
I felt like Hades would have been the one.
Here's what's interesting about that is because if you're telling someone to play a game that's like Hades, you might say like, "Oh, it's a roguelike." They'll be like, "What is that?" And you're like, "Oh, it's like Hades."
yeah.
So
That's true.
the Hades like still applies. It's just it's what we're talking about because the game Rogue was never popular enough to be identified as a game.
You let it become a term.
It's a term.
yeah.
Term.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's some. Wow.
That's a
Good-
pixel
that was good. That was good stuff. So why did we choose to play Hades besides John talking about it a lot? Yeah. Does it have dragons in it?
It does not have dragons.
Okay,
I know. I
I'm
really love
surprised.
dragons, listeners. Everything I love has dragons. They have yet to make a good dragon game. They were going to Scalebound. There's a long saga there that we should get into someday.
we should.
That it never got made.
Scalebound, is that-
Scalebound. The people that made like Devil May Cry were going to make with Devil May Cry graphics a game about riding dragons, made by Platinum Games and Xbox.
Wow.
It was going to be so cool, and then they just like killed the project.
They probably could never get it to work for it to be cool.
It was one of those moments where like remember when Fable got gobbled up by Xbox?
Yeah.
It was one of those where they like ate a bunch of stuff and then destroyed it.
It's somewhere.
It's
if
somewhere.
they want to come back to it,
And
they
it was
can, yeah.
near completion. Like we had like screenshots and game graphics. I was like ready to pre-order it.
Yeah,
I was
I
throwing
hate it
money.
when that happens. I mean, they just like DC or was it Warner Brothers just straight up scrapped the Supergirl movie. Am I remembering that correctly?
right.
Oh yeah,
When it was almost done.
A lot of different things like that. Yeah, Batgirl. It was
Oh, it was Batgirl, not Supergirl. Thank you,
Batwoman.
Batwoman.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
my
movie
bad.
was 100% done.
Done.
They were
Yeah.
like the last thing that there was like another week in editing just to trim out like the rough edges, but the movie was done.
I don't
Yeah,
think we
that's
were
what I was
this
talking
far,
about.
but
I
we
got the
had
title wrong.
we had cutscenes and we had anyway. Microsoft, if you're listening, there is a fan base for Dragon Rider based games.
And it's 1 out of 3 people.
1 out of 3. At least.
It is this guy.
So Hades.
So we chose Hades because objectively it's a good and influential game, right?
Yes.
It won Game of the Year. So there's like several Game of the Year awards, right? Several publications and organizations award Game of the Year. There's 4 big ones. There's the Game of the Year awards, which is now like kind of taking over everything. Then you have GDC, which is Game Developers. They give a Game of the Year. BAFTA, so the British Actors Association, right? And then DICE, which is like developers and other stuff. So this is like, there's 4 of them.
The VGAs being the big ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's 3. They weren't, but they kind of became the big ones. 3 of the 4 ones give a Game of the Year, okay, which is huge. I forget.
An indie game.
Yes, an indie game, which means it's not a huge studio. It wasn't Nintendo. It wasn't PlayStation that put this out. It was just, again, super giant studios that are not super giant, right? They work in one game at a time, and it takes a while to put a game out because there's like a few, not that many people in there. They're obviously growing now because Hades was so good.
Yeah.
It has great mechanics and gameplay, like we talked about. It's got an interesting take on the rogue-like genre, and it's on the shorter side, but with infinite replayability.
Right.
So you could finish this game really, really fast if you're really, really good, but you could not. And even if you do, you could do it again and do it better.
A full run. My record on a full run, which is not fast. Hades players get much faster than this, but my record full run, I think is 21 minutes to beat the game.
Let me Google speedrun Hades real quick.
It's like 21 or 22 minutes
to get through all the levels.
To get through everything, the whole game, to beat it. That said, I have put over 90 hours into this game.
The fastest speedrun is about 5 minutes.
What?
That is flying.
It took me an hour to get out of Tartarus.
So that's like anything with any percentage, like there's nothing, like whatever.
My
right?
beat time is like 21 minutes.
So, yeah. 5 minutes, 16 seconds is the world record.
Wow. That's so
So
fast.
you can beat it in 5 minutes, but like Brendan said,
minutes.
it took him an hour to, get past the first level, which is fine because that's kind of how this game is supposed to go.
Right.
Right. So because it is kind of a shorter experience, it also kind of lends itself to, the format of this podcast. Which works, and also one main thing that John likes to bring up, and as he should because it's important. The story is really good.
Amazing.
How do we know the story is really good, John?
Well, not only is the story great because it's based in a bunch of myths and tropes that we've told in the past, but it won a Hugo Award, which for those of you that don't know, the Hugo Award is a major fiction prize in science fiction. They usually give out for authors that have written major impressive works of science fiction and fantasy. This game was the first game ever to win this as a video game. So, I don't know if it's true because I wasn't in the room, but I would like to imagine that it was so good that they were like, alright, we've never done this before, but we should give a reward to this game for the writing that exists. And the writing is good. It's convincing. The dialogue isn't weird or clunky. I'm sorry, Fire Emblem fans.
Hey, we love it because of that.
We love it because of that.
Yeah.
But this dialogue is really, really well done. It's humanized, and the entire thing is voice acted. So it's incredibly emotionally fraught, too. So you can tell when people are pausing or when they mean things. And this becomes really important with Hades, because he's kind of a grumpy old bug. And, it's really nice to see his moments where it softens.
The voice acting is really good. That's
really
one thing
good.
that I noticed quickly, is that it's definitely it's a cut above standard.
Yeah, so they went all the way to get it to build the immersion, and part of why they did this at Supergiant Games, not only because they wanted to put a good product out there, but you can put a good product out there with just okay voice acting. But the reason they wanted to do this because their previous game was called Pyre, and it was similar, where it was like a roguelite that you had to play through a bunch of different things, and it didn't have as much replayability because people didn't attach to the story as well, or that's kind of how they saw it.
What they see.
Yeah. And what the feedback they got, because I'm sure they do tests and focus groups and stuff. So they made a game. They wanted to make sure this game, whenever people played this game, they felt like going back in there, even though they just lost a bunch of progress, so to speak,
Right.
because the story is that good.
Have to know what happens.
Have to know what happens.
And I won't give it away this episode because it's the first episode. I want you guys to play it through, but it is a story that drives you back into this situation. Like the first time you make it all the way there and then maybe don't succeed, they give you really good reasons to really, really want to be back there. And beating it all the way through once is not a completion of the game.
True.
The story progresses more than one run through.
I didn't know that. So even getting out of hell once. Okay, actually, I should explain this. So in Hades, you are. So I want to get into this right now. Let me see if I have something else. Hold on. Yes. So Hades won a Hugo Award, which means it's a really good story. So now the Hugo institution, whatever, is it BAFTA?
But I think it's associated.
Whatever.
With
the people that give the Hugo Award, which is the biggest award you can get for creative writing science fiction.
Science fiction, yeah.
They now have a video game category.
Completely.
Which started with Hades, right? So, in this game, you are playing as Zagreus, who's the son of Hades
in this game.
in this game.
Yes.
He's the son of Hades in this game. And what you do is you want to get out of hell. We're going to talk about why. But to get out of hell, you can imagine it's really far down, right? The surface is really far up. So you have to go up through all the levels of hell and get to the surface. And when you get to the surface in this game, that's not the end of the story. You have to do it again to get the true ending.
Again and again.
Again and again.
Yep.
So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the story?
Yeah,
of
so
Hades?
the story is, at its bare depth, really simple. And we'll talk about it more next time because I can't talk about it too much without spoiling things. But the story starts out with something we can all kind of understand as teenagers, right? We're fed up with our dad. He's a workaholic. He just, like, hangs out all day and, like, categorizes the souls of the dead. There's literally a room.
I hate it when my dad does that.
Yeah, you can access it, and there's just file cabinets upon file cabinets. And the story is that Zagreus used to work in that room, but he was a little too much of a fuck up, and his dad was like, "You're no longer allowed to work in the room. Whatever. I
So
hate you."
his job was to file things in the right way, and he was bad at
for
it.
the souls. He was uninterested.
Uninterested, fair enough.
Yeah, it's very much implied that Zagreus is a host of wasted potential in the
I
way
see.
that some teenager relationships work,
I see.
right? Where they're like, you could be doing this correctly, but instead you just mess around and like run around a house, and you think the world is given to you on a silver platter because you live in a house full of jewels and fancy clothes.
Because your dad is the CEO of hell.
The CEO of hell.
Yeah.
The Lord of hell.
That's a good business.
It's a good business. It'll never go out of business.
Yeah.
He's very important, but he has to just sit at a desk. And he literally sits at a very large desk. And every time you talk to him, you're like, "Hi, Dad, how's it going?" And he's like, "I hate you and you're a disappointment to me." Right? So eventually, one day, this really
dads.
he's grumpy. And we'll get into why, but he's grumpy. Eventually, you don't have your mom. Your mom is not present, and that's really important. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But eventually, you get fed up with this. And so you're like, "F this, Dad. I'm out." And instead of sort of caring for you or talking to you in any way, your dad says, "You go ahead and try your best. You're just going to die 2 steps out of the door." Because outside of this palace castle gate is hell itself. And there are skeletons and zombies and demons and ghouls and rivers of lava.
And they have no qualms over killing the
just
son of Hades.
destroying you,
Yeah.
right? And because you're immortal, you're a god, and you know Hades is a god. Death is painful and death is terrible, but it's impermanent. What happens is when you die, your soul and body enter the river Styx. You wash down to the very bottom of Hades, and you have to walk out of this bloody, dripping river, grumpy with your dad for once again preventing you from leaving. And so your dad just sort of says, "Fine, give it your best shot."
Which is why it also works with the whole roguelite mechanic, right? Because
Right.
it's a built-in thing where you're a god, and when gods die, they don't die. They are reborn far down in Hades.
And
it
so
just
one of
means you
those
restart.
cool ludic connections is that, like, in a normal roguelike, it's a little off because you're a person, you enter a dungeon, you stab some people, they stab you, you die, and then we start over, and we just kind of start over, and there's no reason. And in the roguelites, that can feel really awkward because you're like, wait, why am I learning? Why am I growing? Why am I progressing? But here you have a character who, while they die in body, doesn't die in mind or spirit. So their growth is real, right? Like, as you learn how to beat certain enemies, Zagreus also, in theory, learns how to beat certain enemies because every time he goes out of hell, it has to try again. And so that's the basic story of the
So
game.
it really works. They really nailed the whole roguelike thing using like a god in Hades.
Using an
story.
immortal.
Yeah, it's a really clever like way of doing it.
And so all of these things, all these moments are set up both to keep the souls of the damned in the underworld. Because if Hades did not do that, he would not be doing his job, and it would be terrible for the people on Earth if we had the souls and skeletons and demons of the underworld writhing around. And so the underworld is meant to trap everyone within it and prevent everyone from leaving. But unlike normal souls, who would walk out the first door and get iced by a 12-foot tall skeleton and just die, Zagreus is a god, and he has abilities, and he has powers, and he's fast, and he's been given a unholy sword named Stygian. And Stygian is this really cool red-looking blade. And so he can fight his way out of the underworld if he tries hard enough. And he's going to make it. He's going to show his dad that doesn't need him in his life. And that's where we start. That's the whole story. And that's all I necessarily want to give you today, unless we have particular questions, because the story, obviously that's not a Hugo Award-winning story, right, Dad?
I do actually have a particular question. Is Hades the final boss?
Kind of.
Okay.
Another cool Luda connection here is beyond the fact that you are, learning and doing all this stuff, is why it's so hard to get out of hell. So why are you dying so much even as a god? It's because if it was remotely doable, then you would have
souls everywhere.
You'd have people coming out of hell, and that's Hades' main job. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is to keep souls in hell.
And so, like, he's doing this to do his job and to keep everybody in hell and to make hell more secure, which is really important. It just has the side effect of, like, causing grief for his son, which amuses the hell out of him. Right?
Makes sense. He does rule over hell. So
he rules over hell. So he's putting all these traps and torturous devices and giant skeletal snakes in your path. But he's actually doing that, like, because that's his job. It just also messes you over as you're trying to escape.
Hey, you shouldn't... It's not like you need to love your job, but if you happen to love your job, then good for you.
And as you start getting better, he does start getting annoyed. He's like, do you know how much of a mess it was to clean up the last time you made it through Asphodel? I'll be here for weeks. The paperwork is enormous.
That's good.
It's great. It's really well done.
After I beat the first boss, I did get to talk to her. Because, of course, I naturally died on, like, the next level.
Yeah.
So I talked to her down there, and she was annoyed with me.
Oh, she's great. Yeah, so the first boss, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is Megara of the Furies, or
of also the Disney Hercules movie.
Same name,
Yes.
Very different character. Very different character. So she's the first of the Furies, and her job is to punish those who are treasonous. And you, being the treasonous piece of crap you are as a son,
yes.
Is confronted by her as the first major boss, which is a fun way to, like, check in with characters throughout. So we have this basic story.
And the bosses you kill also don't die.
They do not.
They die because you killed them, but then
Hades can bring them back.
They can bring them
because
back.
the gods can always bring people back. They can always revive people. This is unlike the Christian mythos. Death is really overcomable here.
So
people have walked into Hades and made their way back out.
It's also why when you go and talk, you can when you die again, you go talk to the boss who just beat, because they're just hanging out in hell.
Right.
Because they're just there. They're like, damn it, you killed me. God. It's the worst. I have to, like, it hurts.
Yeah.
I have to go all the way back up there.
Right.
Yeah.
We have to fight our way all the way. And so they're annoyed with you too, which is just great. But then there's a little bit of a twist. So we start making our way out, and as we're making our way out, these giant glowing spheres of energy appear. And we find out that our family, the other gods that sit high on Mount Olympus, are trying to help us. For various different reasons, but mostly, like, so that they can party with us, is at least the baseline where we get, right?
Sounds good.
They're
The
like,
Greek gods like to party. We know that.
I want to help you. Your father is a grump. Let's try to make sure, young nephew, that you can make it to the surface, right? It's like one of Zeus's first lines for you. And they give you these abilities, and in the game, these abilities manifest themselves as, like, power-ups, right?
Yeah.
And so you can start to pick and choose the gods you want to work with to make it up to the surface this time. And while every time you lose the boons from the gods when you die, they come back and give you more boons. So if you choose Zeus, you get lightning bolts. If you choose Poseidon, you get the ability to dash around and splash people. If you choose Aphrodite, you get to send out waves of love energy, right? And so the game's abilities are constructed around which gods you choose, how, and which ones you decide to work with. And then, as I said, there's this... So those go away when you die. They're gone. But there's this currency called darkness, and that's because the goddess Nyx, the goddess of night, is sort of your stepmother, and she sort of believes in your potential as a human being.
That's
yeah.
nice.
So she's like, I know that you're frustrated with your father, and maybe you'll come to terms one day, but I know that you can do something if you put your mind to it. And so she decides to give you this mirror, and this mirror is the mirror of darkness. And every time you collect darkness while you're out on your runs, this mirror can be used to purchase upgrades to your character.
Yeah.
That are like health, more money, boons are more effective, god stuff is more effective, and so that's the roguelite mechanism. Every time you die, that mirror allows you to upgrade something and makes the next run a little bit easier, but it takes a long time.
Makes the next one a little bit easier because your character's a little better, besides the fact that you're
also learning,
Yeah.
right? And that's the baseline of the game. Everything else you will reveal along the way, and we can definitely talk about it in the next
actually,
episode.
good segue here. So it gets a little bit easier, but one thing you want to talk about is the difficulty of the game.
Yes.
Which is like a caveat that we have about playing games like this. So it might, like Brandon was saying, like, it would be really frustrating to get to the last boss, die, and restart. And I'm sure it still is, but with some of the elements they introduce, it is more doable, and the story helps. Do you enjoy difficult games? I'm asking both of you, Brandon. Do you enjoy difficult games?
It's a mixture. I like just the right amount of difficulty where, like, I have to struggle, but I do win.
Yes, that's.
I don't like the... Like, I play a lot of, like, Civilization, and I recently, this is like a year ago, stepped my difficulty back down a notch because I was like, okay, I can beat it at, like, 7 out of 8. But if I make, like, one mistake, the game, ramrods me.
Yeah.
At like 6, I can basically do whatever I want. It might be a bit of a struggle, the enemy will put up a fight, but I'll eventually win. So I usually like it a bit more there, where like I'm gonna win if I work at it, but I do need to like work at it a little bit.
Yeah, that's that's flow theory 101, right? Csikszentmihalyi, which is like for you to feel good about something, it has to be just the right amount of challenge and the right amount of skill, and then you succeed. Even if you don't, you feel good about what you did. Right?
Yeah.
So that's usually how games are designed. They're designed for you to struggle a little bit, but ultimately win. And that doesn't happen every time. Like, you're not going to beat Mario levels just by trying harder. Like, you have to get better.
Yeah.
But it is designed for you to be able to beat them. Unlike some games, like Dark Souls games, or Soulsborne, which are famous, another genre based on a game, right? So a Soulsborne game has several things, but the main thing is that it's supposed to be really, really, really hard. So when you get to a boss, it's supposed to be like you swing your sword at it and you do like 1% damage, and if they hit you twice, you die.
Right.
That's supposed to be it, and you just get to keep trying over and over again, right? John, how do you feel about difficult games or games that are made to be difficult?
I love difficult games.
You're one of those.
No, so I will not go as far as to say that like I really love difficult games in all capacity. Like, I'm not just gonna sit there and play like solitaire with 9 decks of cards. That doesn't necessarily sound enjoyable for me. But as long as the game has a progress mechanic, I enjoy difficult games, right? And I love difficult games that have what I would call like difficulty of choice. And we just played through Pokemon, so Pokemon very much has this, right? You can challenge a gym leader if you're like level 20 and the gym is at level 30, and it'll be really, really tough, almost impossible. But then you could train until you're level 60 and that gym's level 30, and it'll be super easy, right?
Yeah, barely inconvenient.
Barely inconvenient. It's just really, really, really simple and straightforward. And I really appreciate games that implement that, and that is kind of a core mechanic of a roguelite, where it is going to be an incredibly difficult game. Your first through, you're going to be just stomped, but every time you play through, it'll get easier to the point where when you're on play 200, things will be much, much, much simpler. And I love that progression mechanic. So
Yeah.
I don't love like playing Civ on maximum difficulty, because I feel like every loss that I get on that maximum difficulty gives me nothing. I've learned a little bit, but I've really gained nothing, and I really learned more from just like going and reading guides. So like I don't like games that are just incredibly hard with no end or outlet to the hard. Like fighting games are that way sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of like fighting games on max difficulty.
Like Mortal Kombat, it took me 24 tries to beat the final boss in Mortal Kombat 10.
Right.
And I hated myself.
But if Mortal Kombat worked like a roguelite, where like every time I failed at beating the boss, they gave me a handicap, I think I'd really like that.
Because and a handicap that you earn, not like you're bad at this, here's a handicap.
Right,
like,
right.
You get 50 hits in, now your hits are more powerful, something like that.
Exactly.
Right?
And I do love, so I will say I love hard roguelite games specifically, without saying I love all hard games. But I love a real like head beater of a roguelite.
Yeah.
One of my favorite genres.
And I will say that's definitely like, much as I love Civilization 5, I don't play 6. Someone's gonna come at me for that one, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, all our comments.
Like all 2 of them. Yeah. I love Civilization 5, but yeah, it very much is like that, where I've definitely had games where it's just like, cool, I lost. Why'd I lose? Because I got dealt a very, very bad hand of cards. There's nothing to learn from this. There's no like failing forward from this. It's just
try again.
Well, and that's the cool thing
Yeah,
about
just
Hades,
try
is because
again.
Get good.
some games you realize that you've been dealt a bad hand in Hades, and so you're like, there's no way I can make it out of hell with this boon setup or these specs. But you're like, I can still mitigate that by being like, okay, this is a darkness run where I'm not going to focus on getting to the end. I'm just going to focus on acquiring as much darkness as possible. Or this is a gifting run where I'm going to focus on acquiring as much treasure. Like, you can change the game to mitigate those bad draws.
And that's really cool. It's a way of, again, really clever game design of like, it is a luck random generated game, and if you get bad luck, there are things you can do that still make this run valuable.
Right.
Right. In games that are roguelikes and roguelites that when you get a bad hand, you're like, well, I have
Restart.
nothing to. You restart before you let yourself get killed.
Right.
But if you have something like that in Hades, which is I didn't know about it, so that sounds really good actually. Like if you get in there and like you're like 3 levels in, you've picked up nothing of value. You're like darkness, whatever.
Darkness Run.
Yeah.
We're not going to make it all the way through, right?
Yeah.
We're just going to try to make it here, or we're going to look for specific. Hades is also sort of a conversation simulation game, so there's a lot of like where you're like, all right, I'm not going to do this, but I'm trying to make Aphrodite appear as much as possible because I want to have all the conversation scenes with Aphrodite,
like Persona,
like Persona
much.
and Fire Emblem.
You're trying to get. You're trying to see other characters' story, and the way you do that is by
improving relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about this because I've mentioned how I'm not great at like, I don't have the best motor control dexterity when it comes to combat. Like if you give me a controller and tell me to play FIFA, it will come back to me in a second. I can probably still do it at a high level, but I was never good at doing first-person shooters or like combat games like God of War, the originals. I was okay at them, right? I never beat one. I beat 2, but that's because I tried a lot. So I was kind of hesitant to play this game because I don't know how good I'm going to be, but I'm excited to try with all these mechanics. And part of why I don't like playing these like new Souls-like or heavy combat games is because the combat is unlike Breath of the Wild, which does this beautifully, but other games are like you swing your sword or your weapon and then you spend the next 60 seconds rolling. The dodging mechanic is to roll, not to like actually dodge something. So you're rolling around the battlefield until the boss enters an animation that you know you can hit it right after, and then you roll again for 60 seconds. Right. I hate that. People love that. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I don't get the Elden Ring thing. I don't get the Soulsborne. I don't get that kind of combat. But people love it, which is fine. I don't have to love everything, unfortunately. Right? They don't ask me everything. Like all studios should just come to me and be like, "What about this?" I'm like,
"What about this?"
No.
Don't like it.
But this game is kind of like that. But I feel like the asymmetric stuff, the art style, the story, I'm really gonna get into it, which I'm excited about. How do you guys feel about rolling in games?
Ooh, okay, so I've never played a Dark Souls game. Just
probably a good thing.
Right up front.
Yeah.
But I have played through 2 of the 3 new Tomb Raider games. I've got the 3rd one downloaded and I've started it.
And they have become like that, right? Like
kind
cover and roll kind of
There
thing?
is, it's called scrambling, and it looks hilarious because Laura will drop to all 4s and like literally like scramble away.
Interesting.
And I don't always use it because it really is more of a shoot 'em up game, so my strategy is usually more shoot them up.
Yep.
But I have found it to be hilariously effective. And if I'm remembering correctly, in one of the games there's also a skill of like throwing dirt. So I love to just duck down, throw dirt, and like go
See,
around
I'm down with that. I don't want my only way of not dying in this boss fight to be to roll around.
Yeah, no. Though I will say,
John is like, oop.
in Hades, I do dash a lot. Like, my strategy is very much like dart around the map, fire a few arrows, dart around the map, fire a few arrows.
Well, and to alleviate Phil's concern a little bit, because it does follow that kind of thing. It's not rolling, it's dashing here, where you're just moving really fast, and while you move, you're pseudo-immune. But there are upgrades you can get that make your dashes better or worse, and some of them make your dashes the actual attack itself. And B, it's much faster than Dark Souls. So the bosses are not like attacking for 30 seconds and then providing one opening. The bosses are constantly open. You can always attack them doing anything. You're dashing to avoid the damage, but the damage breaks or pauses come every 2 seconds.
Okay.
So it's much faster, higher level of combat. I don't mind the rolling, and I'm gonna try to sell you on it. Here's why I like.
I just listened to a podcast where some guy was trying to sell someone else on it. It didn't work, but sure.
All right. I think that there is a real cleverness to having to learn patterns in boss fights.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
I love them.
I don't.
Oh.
I agree with you that like it is an interesting game design, and if it's done well, like it not only it takes just the right amount of time to figure out, and there's 2 different phases, and you have to figure out how to do. I appreciate it for all of that. I don't want to do it though.
I've played through Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and I do really like it. But I will say that Hades doesn't feel like a Souls game.
Okay.
It feels like feels much closer to like a hack and slash like Gaiden. And Ninja Gaiden or God of War still have those like moments where you have to time the right hits, but they're not like dodge for 30 minutes, wait for an opening or a big glowing orb or something.
And if you don't get that opening, you have to wait another 30 minutes.
Yes. And I think that I can agree with you that is poor design. Again, I like multiple options. I like the bosses where I can hit them and do damage and it does this much damage, but if I hit them on the right opening, it does this much damage.
Yeah.
And if I hit them on the right opening while using this particular weapon, I kill them in one hit. Those are nice choices.
I wouldn't say it's poor video game design because that's a type of video game design.
It's a type of video game design.
People, like you said, people like that stuff. Like the pattern is it's going to move this way for like 15 seconds, and if you're good enough, you can beat bosses like Let Me Solo Her in Elden Ring, which is a whole thing, right? It's a player, a person in the world that can come into your game with no armor and absolutely no, like, the character is like level 1, but they are so good that they can beat almost every boss, if not every boss, without taking a single hit because they're so good at reading the patterns and understanding how to do it and rolling. Which awesome. That's not how I want to spend my time playing the game though.
Hades doesn't force that.
I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm gonna give my stay tuned, listener.
On the scale of 1 to 10, where a 10 is rolling all the time, waiting 5 minutes for Hades is like at a 2 or 3.
Oh, I'm good. I am excited to bring back my my findings as a grumpy old man that doesn't like rolling. It's yeah. So I feel like we talked about the games. What is Hades? Why it's a roguelite? Why we're gonna play it? A lot of art stuff here, right?
Oh,
Art stuff. So we're going to talk similarly. So we know what Hades is, but we know that the story involves Greek mythology, and I think John wanted to ask us about certain gods.
Well, I just thought we should set up like the story because there is this Hades does tell you a lot and explain a lot, but at the same time, Hades does assume that you know Greek mythology, right? This is not introducing you to a game where it doesn't assume you're familiar with the world. You're introduced to people, and you're supposed to know. And it kind of plays off some twists of Greek mythology that you know, expecting to work one way, and then working the other. So it's kind of important to go in with those frame sets, I think, because they're playing off of these common frameworks. Right?
It helps you get more engaged with the game if you know some of the backstory.
Right.
Which is kind of a study I want to work on with like perceived realism and stuff like that. It's like if you know more about what something look like or is, and I put you in a game that does that thing or does something subverts that, you're going to enjoy more of that than someone that just sees that for the first time. Which is they're still going to enjoy it,
right?
But
So like one key tiny example that doesn't really spoil anything in this game is one of the upgrades that's always provided is a hammer, and this hammer is provided by Daedalus. You don't meet Daedalus in the game. He's not a playable character. He's not a character you can encounter. Do you guys know who Daedalus is?
He made he's an architect who made the labyrinth for the Minotaur in Crete.
Yes, and more famously, after being imprisoned for doing that and for a bunch of shenanigans, him and his son try to escape from prison because he builds a set of wings for his son, right?
Yes.
And he glues them with a bunch of glue, and his son's name is?
Icarus.
Icarus, right? And what happens to Icarus when he flies too close to the sun?
He's in a terrible movie called Eternals.
The glue melts and he plummets.
The glue melts, he plummets, and he dies, right? So there's a shade you can encounter on the first level of Hades that says, when I meet Daedalus, I'm going to have a real talk with him about the glue he's using on his wings.
Oh.
And that's it. It's just a one-off like shade that's standing there that you can talk to, and it has a real grumpy like line about it. But there's all kinds of little stuff peppered in all throughout the entire game that assumes that you're coming into this knowing a framework for Greek mythology.
So, Daedalus, I know who that is because I wrote a paper once that I started by, I was like, I'm going to try to make this less complicated than the Minotaur's labyrinth, right?
Nice.
And I don't know if I succeeded. But anyway.
But that explains where we're coming from.
Yes.
And the Minotaur, really important. We're going to talk about them later, too.
Start us off by giving us the difference between game Zagreus and historical Zagreus.
Okay, yeah, let's start there, because that's a really interesting thing, and something they make jokes on throughout the game that are going to go completely over your head if you don't. So Zagreus actually doesn't come from, common Greek mythology. It doesn't come from, the mainstream Greek mythology, which would be, the Homeric tradition, or, some of, the theogony, works and days, right? It doesn't come from these main title sources. Instead, he comes from what's called the Orphic tradition, which is, a split-off cult sect of old Greek mythological religion. And this old sect, and I'm going to get this wrong, and there's also 5 different
based
accounts.
on Orpheus?
Kind of.
Okay.
Based on Orpheus's discussions, but also this Orphic cult was just a cult to this particular version of Greek history and mythology.
Okay.
Right? And I'm going to get this wrong, and there are a lot of different versions of it, so those of you that are really up on Greek mythology, please know that I'm running with a very particular version of this, and I'm giving a summary, so we won't have time to get into all the
Still,
actual...
you should add them.
Specific. I love to talk about mythology. I teach a class on mythology here, and it's a lot of fun. But in the Orphic tradition, there's a moment where Zeus gives birth to a child, and this child is...
Wait, go back.
Zeus
himself gives birth.
Right.
Like an Arnold Schwarzenegger situation.
No. So he conceives this child. He conceives this child with a mortal.
Okay.
And has this child unwillingly. Zeus is a bad guy in almost every version of Greek mythology. He's not a good guy. I do not condone Zeus. And Zeus is, of course, the god of gods, the leader of all the gods, and he is the god that shoots lightning bolts. And he has this child, and this child is Dionysius, right? God of wine, god of parties, god of fun. And Dionysus is a character in Hades as well. But in this telling of the myth, Dionysus is originally born with a different name, right? He's originally born as Zagreus. And Hera, being jealous at Zeus for one of the things Zeus does, which is, go around philandering, decides to unleash the Titans.
Because Hera is his
wife.
His god wife.
His god wife.
But Zeus is always screwing around with mortals.
Always. And other gods and his own children.
Good for him.
The way you do.
We do not condone death or Zeus in this podcast.
Isn't Hera his sister?
Yes. Loosely.
Okay, Game of Thrones. All right.
Yep, real Game of Thrones-y. Yeah. Everybody is all involved, and it depends on which version of the myth
box
you're
of
reading.
Hamsters.
Yes. Depends on which version of the myth you're reading to, depending on who they and how they sleep with each other. But Hera gets really mad, decides to unleash the Titans, and the Titans come up to kill everybody on Mount Olympus, but primarily Zeus for what he has done. And Hera sort of takes Zagreus and throws Zagreus down to the Titans. And the Titans eat him and destroy him, and he is cut up into lots of little tiny pieces. His heart is the only thing that survives, Zagreus' burning heart. And his heart is sent down to Hades, but it is rescued by Zeus. And Zeus reincarnates the heart into a new person, who then becomes Dionysius. And this version of Dionysius, when he is reincarnated, he has done so with the souls of the living and the dead. And in certain versions, he does this to save the souls from perishing in Hades, which should sound real familiar to those of us that are familiar with Christianity, because a lot of people actually attribute this to like a proto-Christian myth.
Interesting.
Right? And so we get this weird moment where Zagreus and Dionysius are actually the same person, and ending in this retelling of the myth, they coexist as different versions of the same entity.
Because like Zagreus survived the Titans thing, but then Dionysus was also created based on that kind of thing.
His heart survives, and his heart becomes the new Dionysus.
Yes.
Right? The interesting thing about this myth is that, so Supergiant Games doesn't run with the full myth. I'll let you know that right off the bat. Zagreus and Dionysus are two different people, but there are a lot of jokes throughout the game of them relating, and that's where the name Zagreus comes from. So if you feel like you haven't heard the name Zagreus before and you don't know why it exists in Greek myth, that's because it's from a real random offshoot branch of Greek mythology that has to do with like a resurrection myth around Dionysus, right? So one of the cool things is we get this new name, but now instead of making him Zeus's kid, we make him Hades' kid. We put him in the underworld, and he's existed in the underworld around death, so there's this idea of death, and we have him exist with his family, who are the gods on Mount Olympus. But there are a lot of little jokes about him and Dionysus peppered throughout, because...
Like being the same person.
Being the same person, yeah. So they convince Orpheus at some point... They convince Orpheus at some point, who's a musician, famous one. They convince him to write a song about how they are the same person and how and it's sort of a wink and a nod.
So basically, to make another Ludic connection here, it's Nudic and narratology, right? In the game, it's basically Supergiant Games did their research,
a ton of research,
to make sure that this game is as enjoyable as possible if you're just playing it for fun, and also if you have all this knowledge.
Right, like they made selections to make the story work, and the story is very interesting, and we'll talk about the story a little bit. But you can tell like all the changes they made to the original myths were intentional, and they nod and wink back to the original myths.
Yeah, which is
constantly.
like it's like a Ubisoft Assassin's Creed situation, right? Where they want to make ancient Italy as real as possible, given all the things they've changed. Of course, they're changing things,
right?
But everything else is the exact same, right? Everything. This is the most accurate recreation of the Notre Dame anywhere in the world outside of going to the real thing is in an Assassin's Creed game.
Right.
Like the only way for you to experience what the Notre Dame looked like in 1800 or 1700 is by playing Assassin's Creed.
Yes.
Which is insane. So the same thing. It's similar here. It's not like a
With
historical
relationships
reenactment.
between gods.
Yes.
Like if you sat down and you read Coleridge's Greek myths, you would probably get just as much about the gods' relationships with each other as you got from this game. But coming in knowing those relationships ahead of time really helps, because the first time Zeus meets you, he's nice, but he also seems a little skeevy, and you're like, why does he seem so skeevy? But everybody who's read these myths before knows that Zeus is a rapey dirtbag.
Yeah, he's the worst. Yeah.
Right? So we've got that. And then we also, of course, we play off Hades' myth. So the big myth that Hades goes, and I will send out a trigger warning right here. This talks a little bit about like sexual assault and terrible things.
We're going to put this on the description, but if you don't want to listen to this stuff, which is understandable, you can turn off.
You can turn off.
Yeah.
But this is a key part of the game. So what do you guys know about the rape of Persephone?
Nothing.
Okay.
Hades tricked her into eating a pomegranate, and the number of seeds that she ate dictates how long she has to stay in the underworld each year, which is why everything dies in the winter, because her mom, Demeter?
Killed it. Yeah, Demeter.
Is super sad when Persephone's down in Hades for X number of months a year.
Amazing. So like that's where we start, right? We start with this idea. So we know Hades, and everybody sort of knows this myth, which is why there's all these pomegranate iconography around everywhere.
Interesting.
Right? Ton of pomegranate iconography. And the assumption is, because Zagreus' mom isn't around, that Zagreus is the child of Persephone. So Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, who is the goddess of both bountiful harvests and winter simultaneously. And Persephone is her daughter, who starts the story as sort of like the pseudo-goddess of bountiful harvests, but
like taking over the family business.
Yeah, spring-ish.
Yeah.
And she lives comfortably in her house with 1,000 other women, sea nymphs, right? 1,000 daughters of the sea. The way you do, right? Where you just live with 1,000 other
Just like
people as
Nimona.
friends. Right. And as they're living and working near Mount Olympus, she starts to catch the eye of her would-be uncle Zeus.
Okay.
And her uncle Hades and her uncle Poseidon. So her uncles start looking at her, and Demeter goes, yikes. Because these are some real
shady characters.
Shady characters, right? And so she takes her and she brings her to a house on the edge of the known universe that's so far away from Mount Olympus, not even the gods know what's happening or where she is. And she lives there, and she's a little bit lonely and a little bit depressed, but it's okay because she has 1,000 people with her, friends with her, right? Until one day, Demeter is out picking grain in the fields, depending on the myth you're reading, right? And the ground opens up. There's a terrible, violent earthquake, and Demeter's worried for her, and she runs back, and Persephone is gone. Of course, the assumption being that Hades took her, so Demeter immediately goes to Zeus and says, you need to give my daughter back. Hades took her unlawfully. He raped her, and in this case, rape means seizure or to snatch. There is an assumption of sexual and marriageness, but in the original rape, they really just mean to take.
Okay.
And so he takes her and holds her prisoner, and Demeter goes to Zeus and says, Zeus, please let her go. And Zeus says, oh no, he asked permission first, and I already gave him permission since I'm her father. And Demeter goes, ah, yes, you are her father. Demeter and Zeus had this baby, and therefore you legally have rights to give her away to your brother, who didn't show up nicely but just took her to hell.
Yeah.
And so Demeter can't do anything about it, and so she gets really sad, right? Yeah. And winter comes, and this is all a myth to explain why winter exists.
I see.
Yeah.
But eventually winter gets so cold and so terrible, and Tantalus feeds a bunch of people chili made out of his son's organs.
Sure.
That the gods get tired of winter, and they say, all right, Hades, you got to give her back. And he says, all right, but before I do, I'm going to feed her a dinner, and he feeds her 6 pomegranate seeds, which is why winter lasts for 6 months out of the year, because it turns out if you eat food in hell, you are bound to hell forever. But because she only ate 6 pomegranate seeds, she is only bound for 6 months. And so every year she travels back and forth.
Yeah, well, isn't that like the eating of food binding to a place? That's a real old tradition.
It's a real old, it's like Fey folk too. You see it in Camelot myths a lot. You see it in a bunch of places that the eating of food counts as an agreement to a binding contract.
Yeah, well, it crops up in the Count of Monte Cristo where he's at a party and refuses to eat or drink anything there. Because and one of the other characters pieces it together where he's like, that's because he views you as an enemy. Because, like, this guy, I think the way he phrases it is like, well, he's practically Eastern, right? And they believe that, you're not to eat or drink in the house of an enemy or something like that. It's been
Interesting.
It's been a long
It's
time.
common through a whole bunch of mythological tropes, which is really interesting. So you would expect this game then to open up, and Hades would be there, and Persephone should be here too, but Persephone is not here in Hades.
Yes.
And so that's kind of a constant question through the first half of the game is like, where is Persephone? Why the heck is Zagreus Hades' kid? Because that doesn't match up. That's not right anyway. And why are we doing this? But we don't get that. We just get angsty teenager to start, which I think
Nice.
makes a really nice opening.
I love angsty.
Right?
Good
Where
angsty
we're just
teenager
like,
in the
get
game.
out of here,
In the game.
Dad.
In real life, they are scary.
Yeah.
But in the game, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
So that's wild.
And so there's a couple of digs too
That's
early
wild.
on where he's like, "Is this why Mom left you?"
Oh,
Right?
burn.
And then we get to meet Demeter later on, but she's not in the original cast right off the bat too.
Okay.
So there's some. You
A lot
should
of
go
stuff
in,
going on.
You should go in knowing all this because it does flavor the entirety of the world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And Hades is what Hades is in the myths. So Hades in the myths is a brooding, grumpy, terrible old person. But unlike Zeus and Poseidon, who would have taken Persephone and probably like raped her and done terrible things,
Yes.
right? He treats her, in most accounts of the myth, very humanely for a prisoner. He's doing a real like Beauty and the Beast thing, right?
Yeah.
Where he's taking her, he treats her well, he gives her gold and riches and jewelry because the underworld is filled with gold and riches and jewelry, and he keeps her. And Persephone and Hades have an interesting relationship, a relationship between like humanity and winter, where they don't. She's still mad about being kidnapped, but they don't.
As she should be.
As she should be,
Yeah.
right? And that is not condoned. But at the same time, they get married and they are husband and wife, and there's not a completely inamicable relationship.
Yeah, it's. I've seen this before with Hades, where it's like Zeus and Poseidon are supposed to be the good guy gods, but then in Hades is like, no, he's hell, he's whatever.
Right.
But then Hades is actually like, because he understands the whole mortality
Very
and seeing
reasonable.
how like what life means for humans. He's usually a more reasonable person god than Zeus, who's just like all powerful and doesn't really care what happens to anyone because
And
nothing
he's
can
a
ever
jerk.
happen to him.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that there's this common theme, and this happens in mythology and it happens in this game too, that like running the underworld is a heavy, heavy burden and weight. And because of that, he becomes a more reasonable person, but he feels he can never leave it or walk away from it. Because if Zeus doesn't do his job for a day, there's not really a sky, there's not thunder, that's bad. If Hades doesn't do his job for a day, the entire world ends.
Ends. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there is this like, he's grumpy and he's angry, but he's also just really overworked constantly. And there's no.
Aren't we all? Honestly, hard to not be grumpy and angry when that happens. Okay, so for the next couple minutes, with that wild story, we want to do
Wild
something
story.
here.
We're starting.
So we're gonna have John ask us about some of the gods that are in the game
Yeah.
for like a couple minutes. We're gonna see if we can tell you what they are gods.
Gods of.
Yes.
Because this will be important because when you encounter them for the first time, that's what their abilities will be.
Okay.
Right? All right. So we've got Zeus, easy one. We already kind of got it.
Thunder.
Thunder. We're gonna get lightning powers, lightning
King of the
abilities.
gods.
Poseidon.
Sea.
What's his relation to Zeus?
Brother.
Brother, I think.
Brother. It'll be important because they're going to talk about each other a lot. So when he's
Okay.
like, "Oh, you know, your uncle's always the way it is," they're referring to one of the other two. Right?
Okay.
Next, Aphrodite. Love. Most famous, of course, for basically starting the entire Trojan War, right? Over all that
Yes.
nonsense. And she is incredibly jealous and terrible, right? So her abilities have to do with making you weak.
Yep.
Weak in the knees. And for those of you that care about things from a video game perspective, her abilities are objectively the strongest from a damage output perspective. She has high damage
But
output.
she makes you a glass cannon, basically.
No, she just doesn't have a lot of range. So all of
Okay.
her abilities only go out like yay far,
I see.
which makes it a little difficult, but she does have some of the highest damage output. Ares.
War.
So what do you think the war god's ability is?
Making people fight each other.
Oh, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
More
Not that clever.
damage.
More damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, more damage. And you can make giant spinning razor blades.
Oh,
Oh,
right.
sure, of
I
course.
did get that ability.
Of course.
I actually have it right now.
Makes
where I'm
sense.
at in the
Killing
game.
more people is good.
Right. Makes sense. Then we've got Dionysius.
Wine
Wine.
parties.
Wine and parties.
He's a real good looking man.
So what kind of mechanic do you think wine and parties would give you?
Do you make your opponents like stumble or something?
Oh, wait, you can make them drunk.
You make
Yeah,
them
yeah.
drunk, and drunk in this game is basically poison.
Ah, okay.
So if you want to go for like a slow build poison build,
Ooh, that's what I do.
Yeah, Dionysus is going to be your friend, and he's really good if you build him right. Athena,
Athena, war,
Yeah,
and
war, right?
wisdom.
Wisdom, right, springs forth from Zeus's head without. She's the only one that isn't conceived in a relationship. She just pops out of there.
Well,
So,
one of the only
so
ones.
Zeus obviously tries to have sex with her.
yeah.
There's a lot of, she gives you protection. She's your shield goddess. And later on in the game, you'll get the ability to like defy death, which is like come back once when you die instantly.
I have that.
Where
Yeah.
you'll pop back, and she gives you refills on the defy death.
Nice.
So at the very end of the game, if you're feeling real rough, you want to choose Athena because every now and then she'll give you a recharge one of your death defies,
Oh, nice.
Interesting.
which
Okay.
is really great. Then we've got Demeter,
Bountiful
Yeah,
harvest,
bountiful
winter.
harvest and winter.
and in this game, because Persephone is missing, she is
Sad.
winter,
Okay.
hard winter. So winter abilities in games are
Freeze people.
freeze people, frost and frozen. Then we've got Artemis. What do you know about
Archery and
Artemis?
the hunt.
Archery
And
the hunt.
virginity.
Yes, and there are. Artemis is canonically lesbian, and there are many, many references to her sort of not being interested in those kind of things. And she's kind of cool. She's aloof, unlike the other gods, but her ability is to help you fire cool arrows everywhere.
Okay.
Which, of course, makes her my favorite.
Yeah. Hermes.
Messenger.
Yeah, messenger.
Messenger.
Something- Speed stuff.
Speed
Probably makes your
stuff.
dash faster.
Makes your dash more times, makes your dash faster, makes your movement faster. He's really good when you see him. Then we have a couple. Let me see if there's any other gods
I
here.
haven't met Hermes in the game. He hasn't shown up yet.
I think that is all of the gods. I might be missing one or two on my list here.
Yeah, give us a couple of more characters.
Yes, then
just
there's
so see we can
there's
know
a
what they
ton
are.
more characters.
Yeah.
So you can buy items at a store, and the store is who do you think manages the currency of the underworld? Who do you have to pay in coins to cross the river Styx?
Charon.
Charon.
Ooh, nice.
So Charon here runs the marketplace. So as you fight your way through, you'll get darkness, which is one currency. You'll get treasure, which is like a vanity currency. It upgrades like your room and the castle, and you can make stuff look nicer.
That's
and
nice.
then you'll get real gold, and
Like
real
Animal
gold
Crossing.
goes away like Animal Crossing. Real gold goes away when you die at the end of your run. But during the run, it can be used to buy things from Chiron.
Okay, and each pops up in random levels, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you ever get the chance to access Chiron's gold stash, it is worth 300 gold, and I recommend you take it.
Okay.
So.
I always thought that his name was pronounced Chiron because there's a famous 1940s French race car driver called that.
So
Yeah.
little pixel of depth here. Greek does not actually have a CH. Greek has a chi, which is
Yes.
a X looking thing, and it makes a sound, which
So,
Okay.
Charon.
Chiron, yeah.
All right. Let's see here. One more. Let's give us one more. Let's see if we can guess. Pick one of these.
Oh, another really good one is Patroclus. Do you guys remember who Patroclus is?
Was he
I don't know what that is.
Achilles' like lover?
Achilles' lover, and what happens to him in battle?
Well, he's killed by Hector, right?
He's killed by Hector during the Trojan War, and Achilles gets so mad that he goes on a rage and kills everybody for him, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, because Achilles goes
They were
on
just good friends, guys.
real good friends.
Well, I think in a lot of translations they're like they're cousins. It's like,
Ah.
no, they were lovers.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, so for those of you that don't read a lot of Greek mythology, when Greek
So most of
mythology
you.
had to run through Christian traditions for America, a lot of the translations translate things weird when homosexuality would occur, which would be a normal thing in Greek culture, in ancient Greek culture, but a very strange thing in like the early 1800s. And so a lot of the translations have strange things. But he is Achilles' lover, and he gets killed, and Achilles goes on a rage and he disobeys his commander, right? And he starts killing everybody. And he's such a great warrior that he really swings the Trojan War in favor of everybody, but he does it at the expense of directly disobeying his king. So what happens if you directly disobey your king when
Treason.
you die? It's treason, and what happens to treasoners?
After they're dead.
And, yeah, mutineers in almost every religion and culture.
Well, I think in Dante they go to like the lowest circle of hell where Satan himself chews on them.
Yeah, so it's usually the most terrible parts of hell are reserved for mutineers and betrayers, right?
Yeah.
People that have lied and betrayed people. And this is no different, except for because Achilles is such a great warrior, he kind of gets saved. So you will find him in the House of Hades, and he's your personal tutor. So from a story perspective, when we're like, why is Zagreus so good at combat? Because Achilles has got wrest out of the lowest circle of hell, out of Tartarus, in exchange for training Zagreus in swordplay, which is essential. But Patroclus, who died a hero of the Trojan War, would exist where?
Heaven?
Yeah, so in the Greek
is
mythology,
that,
we don't have
Elysium?
a heaven, but we have an Elysium.
Yeah.
And they are forever separated. Unless
Aw.
you can
It's
find
okay. They're just good friends, though. Why would they?
unless you can find some way to bring them back together.
Ooh.
Ooh, little hint.
Interesting.
Little gap. But when you find Patroclus, he's moping by the river, up in there, and he will re-grant you 3 replenishers of Death Defiance.
Oh wow.
He's real good.
Nice.
You want to find him, or a 60% bonus to attacks for 10 rooms.
It's pretty good too.
He's real good. Try to find him whenever you can.
Okay. Cool.
I was gonna say that like, I feel like Achilles is also one of those few mortals who, who could like fight his way up out of Tartarus if he wanted to.
And the assumption is that he is here almost of his own punishment. So you learn that through talking to him, but he feels he deserves to be in the lowest depths of hell. For betraying
some
Patroclus.
deep stuff. I love this. So
it won a Hugo Award.
You're right. So the last thing I want to do here is talk about how our experiences playing, how we're going to play. So John has beat this game several times, playing on Switch.
Yep.
Brandon has just started, and he's playing on Steam, and I haven't played yet, and I'm going to play on Switch. So it's interesting to think about. We're going to be playing on different systems, and Steam computers are more powerful than the Switch. So it'll be interesting for in a couple weeks for us to talk about our experiences with the graphics.
Are you playing with a controller or with mouse and keyboard?
Controller.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see of like, not first person shooter, like frames per second and like how the graphics look and that kind of stuff. Because I am also playing on the Switch OLED, which means the screen is better.
You'll be having it. Well, and I think the processor's better too, isn't it?
They never officially said that, but I think so.
Yeah.
But we're going to have different experiences. That's important because a lot of gaming is can your console do this?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not important for us, but that's important for the industry. It's why PlayStation 5 talks about having more RAM or more modern RAM than Xbox, all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And it is important for game making because if your console doesn't have, and the Switch is finding this out now, which is why we need some sort of update, because developers won't want to make games for your console if they can only sell it on your console, and they have to hamstring themselves, and then their game looks bad.
Right.
And then when a game looks bad, it's not, oh, the Switch sucks, it's this game is terrible. Right? So whenever you have a system that lags behind others, it almost always happens that they start getting less games, which won't happen with Nintendo because they have their own game makers.
IPs, yeah.
But what happens, it creates a situation where not as many people are working for that, and it creates a divide. So you don't want that, right? So it's why it's going to be interesting for us to talk about how it looks different perhaps on a computer screen versus an OLED screen, a new Switch, and an older Switch.
I will also say, in fairness, so starting after today, I'm going to start over. I've never started a new file. I've only played on this one file the whole time, and so today will be the day that I start on a new file.
Okay, so you're going to restart from as if you are starting from scratch.
As if I'm starting from scratch, original run, which means that because experience matters, and I will still do probably much better, but I will have to gain my darkness all up again, which will take time.
Okay. Wow, okay, so that was it. That was our primer on Hades,
Welcome
the
to
video
mythology.
game, not Hell itself, although, sure.
Also,
That too.
Also. We'll be playing it over the next 4 weeks. So in 2 weeks, we're recording our first impressions episode, as we always do. And then in 4 weeks, we'll be recording our review episode, where we review the whole game and talk about our experience and that kind of stuff.
Oh, we didn't talk about why we're doing Hades right now.
Oh,
At this
sure.
moment.
There's one more reason we're doing Hades right now, which is...
Hades 2 is coming out. So for those of you that are following along or have played it before, the reason we're doing this is because they're about to release a second game, and it's getting huge attention everywhere, and so hopefully this will prepare you for playing the second game.
And us.
And us.
Yeah. So that's one more reason why we're doing, besides it being objectively a good and fun game and John talking about it all the time. Yeah. So thanks again for joining us here at Professor's Play, the show in which you can get just a pixel of deep thinking, and today was a good amount of deep thinking. So for those of you that thought we were lacking, today was good. With your video games discussions. I'm Professor Phil Chavot. He's Professor John Adams. He's Professor Brandon West, and together we're professors who play video games. And we'll see y'all in a couple weeks when we try to escape hell a few times.
See if we can get out.
See you then.